Section 380. Deleted. Now, you must understand, in our discussions of late, we have been dealing with your current problems and treating them in those terms for your convenience. We have been dealing with the condition of the immediate self in its response to environment and situations. This immediate self is not isolated, however, from other portions of the entire personality. The very fact that you have me here is the result of past experience and development. On the one hand, all of your questions have their answers. The inner self knows, but the immediate self does not recognize their answers. The degree of your understanding and development is the result of past endeavors in other lives. The degree represents your practical ability to use inner knowledge to solve problems. On the one hand, again, you know the answers. On the other hand, you must learn to recognize them and apply them. Each succeeding reincarnation finds you in a better position to do so. The inner self must therefore be recognized by all levels of personality. The inner self must become the immediate self, you see. This unity then puts you in a position to begin a truly fulfilling existence in other realities after physical death. You are solving many problems therefore now, since this is to be your last reincarnation in physical terms. You must know enough to speak nearly as an equal with your inner self in order to do this. The process had finally to become conscious in your terms, with the ego highly involved. The intuition portions of the personality had to have the full cooperation of the intellectual and conscious self at this point in your development, and I am speaking of you both here. The conscious had to appreciate in quite real terms its dependence upon intuitional wisdom. There had to be agreement and unity. The conscious self was not to be left by the wayside, wondering while the intuitional ability led to fulfillment. The conscious intellectual faculties had to realize what was operating in order that they themselves be fulfilled. True questioning and true use of the critical faculties will always lead Ruber to intuitional truth. So, there is no reason to fear them. Those who do not understand their abilities intellectually must one day be led to question them. The intuitions and the intellect are meant to challenge and develop each other. And the intuitional knowledge and the intellectual knowledge will ultimately lead to the same answers. It is only when you do not carry through in either that there appears to be contradiction. An excellent example presents itself in the manner that Ruber utilized intellectual and intuitional knowledge in his poetry. This same spirit should be used in approaching our work and in his general living pattern. An alternate example is your painting. These are the most fruitful ways for both of you to approach all problems. The same qualities and spirit that you bring to your work should be extended to your life pattern, for they are correct for you both, and you operate at prime efficiency then. Otherwise, you utilize some qualities at the expense of others, and do not as quickly attain your goals. As Ruber thrusts ahead, trusting his ability in his poetry, so he should in his psychic work, and now in vigorous physical activity. The idea of restraint therefore must be banished. He does indeed often speak without thinking, and when he does, he often influences people most. Now, he must trust himself to move physically without thinking, and as much as possible to let his body act in a spontaneous way. Do not keep checking. This does not mean he should ignore discomfort particularly, but he should take his conscious mind away from his physical body and let it operate alone. And I repeat, he should indeed stay away from spiritualistic literature, not because there is something basically wrong with it, but because it presents him with a dilemma. He knows intuitively what he knows. Intellectually, he will catch up with this. The spiritualistic literature causes a needless conflict between his intellect and intuitions. The intuitions will clear this up for him if he lets the matter rest. And again, trust his inner self. If you trust your inner self, the peanuts difficulty will vanish. What you are after is the recognition by the immediate self of the larger inner self of which it is part. This is always the direction of development, until finally the immediate self and the inner self are one. This does not occur in the course of usual reincarnations, but it does occur ultimately in all. Christ had such a recognition, for example, and this recognition is merely the beginning of another phase of development. Problems are methods of learning, set by the inner self. This is a particularly important statement. They should always be faced in this light. Other existences also involve these challenges. I must help you, for you are brothers left behind. You are therefore challenges to me. Your progress is my challenge. Rupert's condition now is his challenge, for in overcoming it, he overcomes limitations of which he was not aware before. Only when they became physical was he acquainted with them. Looked at this light, you see, they become methods of learning. Without them, there would be little progress. I am not saying that without illness as such, there would be little progress, but in your system you materialize your strengths as well as your weaknesses, and deal with them. Rupert's recovery will be the symbol of a far greater recovery, and of inner development that will never fail him. He must now push himself to physical activity, into vigorous action. And in doing so, he is expressing the inner decision that he will no longer tamper with intuitional spontaneity. He has learned what happens when he does, and he has unlearned the false and distorted lesson that was put upon him in his early years. He will have finally learned intellectually and consciously that he need not fear the spontaneous self, which has always been his strength, for it sustains him. He was made to deeply fear it, and it was a strong, dominant part of his personality. The psychic work made him fear that he had allowed it to go too far. The ego found poetry acceptable and never challenged it. The psychic work was something else entirely. This was other problems mentioned earlier, led him to a deep mistrust of the intuitional self. He felt he could not go ahead. He needed time to get his bearings. It felt psychologically paralyzed to some strong degree, and this was reflected in physical terms. Luckily, the intuitional self did not retreat to any large extent. The developments were already fact and worked to good advantage. They were held in abeyance, however. All of the other reasons given, of course, also applied. Yet, the intuitions could not be allowed to operate at the expense of the conscious self. The conscious self had to learn to accept and welcome them, and to unlearn false lessons. All of this was worked out through the symptoms. There were other ways that could have been chosen, some easier ones. However, there was no more effective way, considering the personality's makeup. The final stages are unfolding, and now both the conscious and intuitional selves are joining forces, and will bring about the body's release from symptoms entirely. The arms will open completely when there is complete acceptance of what I have just now told you. When both portions of the self are completely accepted and embraced, you need have no doubts of this. I recommend peanut oil, and it has not been used. Rubber is entirely over the block with the dream book now. His monthly periods have also straightened out. His chemical and hormonal systems have now normalized themselves. His body is utilizing intaken vitamins now. The circulation is slightly poor still. The program outlined for the 21-day period is an excellent incentive, and serves to give his conscious mind some place to focus, so that the inner self can complete the healing process. All activities are good for him, mental and physical. His classes stirred him up, you see. It was fear that slowed him down. Faith in his abilities and in himself as a part of all that is will now set him in motion. He picked up restraints from you because he was open to the idea of restraint so strongly. Before, he used his intuitional abilities, but always intellectually mistrusted them to some degree. Now, he will trust them consciously and intellectually, and this development had to occur for his fulfillment now. It was a prerequisite for other developments and the work that will come. You always recognized and envied his spontaneous nature, without realizing consciously that it operated despite his intellectual disapproval of it. Through his difficulty, you are saved considerable problems, for through his experience, you understand the dangerous inhibiting nature of over-restraint. It is because his spontaneous self is so strong that the conscious self had to learn to cooperate, if the personality was to achieve full stature. I bid you good evening. Rob said good night, Seth. Rob nodded. Jen was again very well dissociated, and a long time coming out of trance. Her pace was quite slow last delivery. Her eyes opened very slowly, and she went to bed when she finally did get up. Her trance was as deep as any she has had, she said later. It seemed obvious that Seth used this extreme in order to get the material through tonight without distortion. I thought it an excellent summary of problems we seem to be surmounting.